In the month of August, water utility Rand Water implemented water restrictions in Gauteng's 3 metros due to its pressure in its water network. The DA subsequently responded by opening a case against the member of the mayoral committee for environment and infrastructure services over the ongoing water cuts as well as the shortages that are being experienced in part of the city's southern suburbs. Joining us now from the South African Water Chamber is Mr. Benoit to tell us why legal action should not be a last resort, according to him. Mr. Leroy, thank you for your time today. Before we talk about the legal issues and the legal ramifications, let's talk about the persistent problem of either a shortage of water, if not a shortage of water, then a degenerate quality that is being consumed by the residents. What are the core reasons behind this water shortage?
Yes, Tammy, the core reasons are really threefold. One is Rand Water is a bulk utility provider through to our cities, so Johannesburg Water in this case, and they are pumping at maximum system yield. So irrespective of whether the integrated Vaal River system is full or not, which it is, just about, it's at 85%, is that its pumping systems, its reservoirs and bulk pipelines are at maximum system yield and water user license limits. It can't pump more. For some reason, the demand from Johannesburg has exceeded very early in the season, because we're really in spring, has exceeded the supply in Johannesburg. But what we've seen is also, we've got to remember that there's something like 36% of our water on average that leaks in our cities in South Africa. So that's not a utility Rand Water issue. That is the service provider, the municipality who distributes the water. So we have that issue there. Plus we've had electrical infrastructure collapsing, both on the Eskom side and on the municipal side. And without electricity, you can't pump water. So it's a couple of things really causing a perfect storm to an extent. And this is why, to me, resorting to the courts is in actual fact, we know what the responsibilities are and who needs to do what. And who are you going to take to court here? Rand Water is doing its part. If it doesn't have energy, it can't do it. So it's a fairly complex situation, and South Africa is using all the water that it actually has. So that's why we have a R1 trillion gap in our water infrastructure gap master plan, and that's a very big number. It's 2 Medupis or 2 Kasilis. That's a little bit of background as to, I think, the issue that's raising its head early in summer.
You mentioned the issue of water infrastructure, and that also seems to be a key challenge. The current infrastructure basically was designed for a much shorter time than what it is currently being used for. Talk to us about that.
So, generally speaking, our water infrastructure in our cities, so the pipe network or the reticulation system, we call it, it goes from the bulk, right, which is 1,600 millimeter big, so it's really, really big. It's as tall as the average lady, and goes down to a half-inch, or 15 millimeter at your household. That infrastructure is designed for about 50 years and hasn't been replaced progressively. Every year you should be replacing 7 to 8% of that. So what's happened is, it's a global issue, is that water is a low priority item in city budgets. It shouldn't be, but it is. And what's happening is that infrastructure is so old that it leaks a lot. And what we need to do is not only replace the infrastructure, what we need to do is also treat it and manage it for the pressures it can take. So City of Cape Town, for example, reduces the pressure in low demand so that the leaks are lowered and we conserve in our reservoirs and build up in our reservoirs. City of Joburg does not have that system in place. And that would be the immediate system that needs to be put in. And that can be digitized and manually, and not manually managed, but managed from a digital perspective, so that we can ensure that the system is not put under undue pressure. And at night, we can reduce the pressure completely because there's low demand, and then the system can fill up. The problem is when you start emptying areas of where the reservoirs go empty and the pipelines go empty, when you refill them, what happens is you get water hammer. And that gives you spikes of pressure, and that also breaks the piping. And also what it does, it scours. It ends up scouring any residual dirt we have, etc., because of the increased pressure, and you get murky water. So the system's made to be full at the whole time. And it's supposed to be maintained. And The reality is it isn't. So we have competing priorities. Do we build houses or do we maintain our infrastructure? We need to do it all. And the reality is there's not enough tax money to do it all. That's the reality we have at the moment.
Is it really, Mr. Roy, a budgetary issue? Is it really about money? Or is it about finances that are being misspent, at times even underspent, and just the sheer will of manpower to be maintaining infrastructure as one ought to? Because, as you know, if you don't actually maintain the infrastructure, in the long run, it does end up costing you more just to get water to the people.
I think it's a combination of both. And I think a lot of the failing municipalities we see, their revenue collection is half of those who have less water outages. So, if you compare Mfuleni, you have roughly half the per capita budget for the city than what City of Cape Town does. So you have to get revenue for these services, and the majority need to pay for it, and water is underpriced. That is one of the issues. That we don't prioritize water is definitely a malaise in South Africa, and we need to overcome that. And we have so many competing priorities, so it's not an excuse, it's a reality. We have to, we've got to maintain the roads, we've got to maintain our water infrastructure, energy infrastructure, but we have been sweating the assets and not maintaining them. So we have to maintain them, and what we have to do is realize that the prices for maintaining water and sanitation infrastructure that are interlinked are much higher than what we are recovering from the user at the moment. So it doesn't sound good that the price of these services need to go up, but the reality is if less people are paying for a fixed volume, you need to increase that unit price. And this is why we've called for an independent water regulator to regulate that whole supply chain, which is not regulated at the moment, and that's why we're getting a lot of these disparities also. And the regulator would also, and this is an international trend, would say that your unaccounted or your non-revenue water, your leaks have to be below a percentage for you to be able to get an increase. And so we need to manage that. And at the moment, it's something that is unfortunately not a priority in our cities.
Mr. Leroy, if I could, in just the 30 seconds that we've got left, you mentioned that going the legal route is not the way to go. And you also mentioned the community of Mfuleni who have taken their water woes to court. They've won, but are still finding themselves without water. They're still finding themselves without houses. What then are the solutions for communities in distress?
So winning the court cases in Mfuleni we've seen, and this is why I think in Johannesburg it's not going to lead to any positive immediate relief. So it's really, we need to force, society in general has to make local, provincial, national government accountable. And as, and this is, I think, part of our Achilles heel, is we do not hold our councillors accountable and council accountable. That's the only thing we need to do so that we can revive the economy, get more money into the economy and prioritize water and sanitation and energy infrastructure because they're interlinked. We cannot pull them apart. Fueling this through the courts, I do not believe is the only solution. It may be part of the solution, but that yet has to be tested.
Mr. Benoit Leroy from the South African Water Chamber, we thank you very much for your time and your insight this afternoon.